All right, gentlemen. So a pleasant good evening, everyone. I am Keron Sooklal, and on behalf of the ASIS and Fernando TNT chapter, I will be hosting today's session, which is terrorism affecting the global workplace. One of the chapters that makes up the CPP module that the TNT San Fernando chapter and Jamaican chapters is going to be offering. So, as customary in any meeting that the chapter will host, we like to start off the session with a safety moment. And before I open up the floor to everyone, I have a couple of items that I probably want to discuss and share with you. But I leave the floor open now for anyone who may wish to contribute to a safety moment that will benefit all. All right, well, without further ado, and in the interest of time, so what I wanted to touch briefly on is the unfortunate incident that we had today of Toje Rickens. I hope I pronounced his name correct. Unfortunate passing of this officer. Anybody followed it by chance? So just to give a highlight, so this officer was essentially gone down at his workplace in SN here in Philippines. And the initial report indicated that it is possibly a reprisal killing, but nonetheless, it took place at the workplace. And you know, with as we move out from a pandemic, we're still going through a pandemic. You know, there are all the security gurus, all the pundits in the industry talk about certain upticks in events, and active accident is one of those incidents that will just put itself out there. So there are several takeaways from this unfortunate passing of this officer, but critical is to know in terms of your hiring practices, how you go about onboarding personnel, and just your normal day-to-day method in terms of how you manage active accident incidents at your workplace. So that's one takeaway. Anybody want to add anything before we move on?
Well, to be honest, I think a lot of companies, because they're not very professional and some of them don't want to pay wages that or can't pay it because of the way that they tender, the prices that they quote for jobs, tends to go away from looking for the type of personnel that is required, because they wouldn't be able to get them, and they take what there is and don't look at the consequences after. But at the end of the day, it's a stigma for the industry, because you're not going to only hear, and you hear the first thing I saw on the news, a security officer get gunned down, and further investigation is now revealing that prior to his hiring, you would have had, situations that should not have even have him wearing that uniform fellas to be in our premises, where it could have caused more damages to the other people. It's sad, but for nothing ones are talking, and I think that is the effort TTPSA wants to go in to see if they could get people on board in such a way that quoting prices for a job should not be at the extent to create this type of monster for the industry. Men should be able to quote what is required, and you should make sure that your officers have the type of training and give the type of service that is required. So that is going to give you the edge, right? But every nook and corner now you're seeing a security company, and you're trying to find out where it come from and how it come from. And
yeah. I mean, a major red flag that I saw in that story is it was one officer posting night. I mean, we all study in CPP, and you all know this, and you don't ever place an officer by himself. But I mean, you could have snowballed, and the what ifs could have been posed. Well, if another officer was there, what would have happened? But I hear your point, and I agree with you, Mr. Batis. All right, guys. So I want to ask you all. I know, other than for Kevin, if it is you have your POA in front of you, we want to go to chapter 2, page 39. And as customary or my style, I will want to underscore the fact that there are key learnings in each page, each paragraph. And what we are about to do here today is just underline these things, because when you are rereading, or you always skimming through your book, these are things that you want, that the highlighted items is what you want to memorize. The highlighted items is what you want to stick with yourself. And even when you become a successful CPP holder of this designation, CPP, and you pick up your book to flip through, you're like, oh yeah, this is real good information to know. So, Riyadh, welcome. We are actually now about to start the review of chapter 2, page 59 of your crisis management book. Riyadh?
Yeah.
All right, so crisis management, chapter 2, page 59.
Okay.
Now, I assure you guys this evening's session is going to be very, very short, with some key learnings or some key takeaways that you'll need to underline, right? The question is, guys, what is terrorism? And, persons may have an idea of it, or understanding of it, but I have something to tell all you guys. Up to this day, nobody could really pinpoint and identify what terrorism is. And you may agree or you may disagree. But again, the gurus, the pundits in the industry, they agree to one thing, that everybody have an opinion of terrorism, what terrorism is, what causes terrorism, the definition for terrorism, etc. But according to the chapter chair, for the purpose of CPP, we'll go through what ASIS International identify terrorism to be. But before I do, I want to just start a video. I'm not going to put anybody in spot to explain, what terrorism is, etc. But I'm just going to share a video just for you learning, and will trigger thought as we move on in tonight's session. Carlos, you'll just confirm for me when I start to play the video, if it is here in it, please. So anybody can confirm for me, please, right?
Yeah, Keron, I didn't hear you.
You'll just identify for me and just confirm that you're hearing and seeing for me, please, on a share video, right?
Okay, all right.
Yep.
We hear the word terrorism a lot, despite the fact that it is a term that is notoriously hard to explain. There is no international consensus on the definition, legally or academically, for the term terrorist. In fact, the US government has more than 20 definitions for it. And in 1996, the UN formed its own ad hoc committee to draft an official explanation of the term, and that took 10 years. So what exactly constitutes terrorism? A mix of those definitions results in something like this. Terrorism is violence, or the threat of violence, against non-combatants or civilians, usually motivated by political, religious, or ideological beliefs. Outside of that broad definition, it might be better to explain terrorism by talking about what it's not. Terrorism is not organized crime. There are a few key differences. One is motivation. Terrorism is usually politically or socially motivated. Organized crime is profit motivated. Secondly, people in organized crime don't usually seek media attention, something terrorists do. Third, organized crime doesn't usually desire government recognition, unlike most terrorist groups. Terrorism is not violence carried out by one mentally ill person. This can be confusing because when it comes to violent acts, it's not immediately apparent who is sane and who is insane. For example, Mon Haran Monis took hostages in an Australian cafe in December 2014. He claimed that it was an official attack on Australia by the Islamic State. However, after the siege ended, many people, like the Australia Prime Minister, agreed that he was a mentally ill person and could not be considered a terrorist. Monis was killed in the siege, and his true intentions and affiliations remain unknown. Research shows that 40% of lone wolf attacks are perpetrated by mentally ill individuals. Terrorism is not violence perpetrated by a government against another nation. If a nation commits an act of violence, it is usually referred to as an act of war, or under certain circumstances, an act of self-defense. There are some exceptions to this rule. If a nation indirectly commits an act of terrorism by funding a terrorist organization or covertly organizing a terrorist act, that is still considered by some, like the United States, to be a terrorist action. Terrorism is also not an act of violence by a government against its own people. Nations like Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia had a history of terrorizing their own civilians, but those were generally considered to be acts of oppression or repression and not terrorism. These definitions are based on how the UN, the US, and many international scholars interpret these terms. If you disagree or have a dissenting opinion, you're not alone. As we said at the top of this, terrorism is notoriously hard to define and often used to mean many different things by pundits, politicians, and the media. If you want to know more, watch this video on why terrorist groups can't last forever.
The most common reason a terrorist group stops committing terrorism is because they eventually become a political party.
Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. We put out new videos.
Sorry, everyone. Just want to give credit to that video, and it is titled "What is the definition of terrorism?" and it is published by Now This World. So we went to the definition of terrorism, and it gave a nice landscape overview. It didn't dive granular into the different aspects of terrorism, the organization aspect, but it just gave us a nice understanding of what the beast that we are dealing with. So without further ado, guys, I want you all to open your books to chapter 2, page 39. And we want to talk about the history of terrorism. And I want to engage you all to pull out that nice fancy highlighter, yellow, the pink one. Those are time to pull it out now. And we want to identify the first page, which is titled The Old Terrorists. It is critical, guys, that we understand the history, because those type of questions is what will come when Carlos and I are doing the mock sessions with you all. And we want to highlight the first line, the second sentence in the first line. One can see the emergence of terrorism in actions of many groups throughout history. The Jewish zealots fighting Roman occupation of Israel in the 1st century AD, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The French revolutionaries of the 18th century. Now, just a sideline, Mahatma Gandhi would have indicated that every revolution started with a single act of defiance. Now, whilst we term the French Revolution as terrorism, we look back to in history and we say, it is because of the French Revolution is how France would have created the empire that which is sit on today. So, just a point to note, guys. If we go to look back in history of many of those first world nations and how they would have acquired wealth, or how they would have their forms of I don't use the word oppression, but their forms of acquisition of riches, we could look back today and say, hey guys, but that's a red flag. That thing looks like terrorism. But I don't want to delve too much on history. But nonetheless, again, I just ask you to underline for the sake of not only memorization, but also for your general knowledge. The second line in the second sentence in the first line, that's one can see the emergence of terrorism. And the four listing that they have there. So we want to go to the new terrorists now, guys. With the first line we have there, second sentence, the motivation of these new terrorists include religious, and we highlight from there up to prophecy. Now, I'm going to read a sentence out to you guys, and you're going to understand how simplistic and again, it is a lot of content, but these are the key learnings you want to take away from the book. The motivation of these new terrorists include religious fanatism, supremacist ideology, and apocalyptic prophecy. Now, with COVID, with this pandemic, you see many persons come out from their shell and identify in some way or the other of their ideology. And nothing is wrong with having an ideology. The problem begins when we start having a radical ideology. For example, I might say, here with them, everybody must wear Nike shoes. I believe my ideology, everybody must wear Nike shoes because it will protect your shoe. The problem starts when I say, here what, I am going to start stealing everybody Reebok. You know what, I'm going to start doing wrong things, the persons who wear Reebok, Adidas, Fila, etc. So nothing is wrong with having an ideology. Problem is when we radicalize that ideology for the sole purpose of hurting others for our belief. We go down to the third paragraph, which is the face of terrorism change on September 11th, 2001. It is critical, guys, that you'll highlight this, because as you go out through the book, one thing that you'll see succinct is the fact that September 11th stands out from an ASIS International doctrine. The face of terrorism changed on September 11, 2001. Earlier terrorism encompassed assassination, kidnapping, and suicidal individuals who killed others with explosives and died in the process. For example, suicidal bombers. What we would have identified and recognized is that many of the new face of terrorism today now uses media to their advantage. And that's actually a form of, a type or identifying marker of the New World terrorists, where they use media to publicize their cause or their initiative, or to take responsibility for an unfortunate event. We go to the fourth paragraph, and we want to capture those 4 lines in the first 4 lines in the fourth paragraph. Of course, the effects of 9/11 were graphically displayed in the media. The author of Mass Media Terrorism, NACOS 2002, notes that although the term media terrorism captures terrorists' emphasis on communicating their deeds and their causes. Exactly what I just said there, guys. Now, one of the things that we learned from 9/11, and digressing a bit, is that Mohammed Altaf and his 14 other colleagues would have went and learned to fly a plane. And I know Mr. Rollins here will know exactly what I'm speaking about here. He went and learned to fly a plane, but no attempts was made to learn how to land a plane. So that should have been a red flag. That should have been a key indicator. And again, digressing a bit, when we looked and we dive granular into the various protection of asset books, you will see that security, or the upgrade to security, began. Anybody could tell me when?
It was post 9/11.
That's right, Kenneth.
Because post 9/11 is when you had the whole thing of people looking at BCP in a more serious way, and the whole travel industry changed overnight. A friend of mine was a person on an Air Jamaica flight and was stuck in Jersey for the better part of almost 2 months. Wow. Until regular commercial flights could start back again, while the TSA was established and the various security protocols put in place to prevent a similar attack from happening again.
Okay.
And also with World Trade Center, you had entire corporations that were literally wiped out because of 9/11.
Yeah. And what we also saw there, I mean, of course, I must make mention of it. We actually saw, the context was, well, here is, guys, if somebody could do this with an airplane, imagine what they could do with a tanker filled with methanol, what they could do with a vessel that transporting ammonia from Latin American country to the Americas. And it switched on, you know, the idea was, well, if they could do it on a plane, imagine how easy it is to get onto a port. And that would have actually stemmed the creation of the ISPS code, which is called the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code. Just a point to note there, guys. I promise I wouldn't digress anymore. But again, what we see here is that 9/11 would have changed the face for security. I mean, I don't want to, it might sound unfortunate, but in our benefit. Kevin, I saw you bumped up there. I was actually sharing with the team here that 9/11 would have contributed to the formation of the ISPS code. And it was said that if Mohammed Altaf and his 14 other colleagues were able to board a plane without learning how to land, that should have been a red flag. The question was asked if they could, enter an airport so easily. It was scary to think how they could board a vessel that is full with methanol, board a vessel that is full of ammonia, and crash into some state capital in the Americas or any other country. And that would have been the formation of the ISPS code. So we want you all to highlight, we move on to page 41, and we want you all to highlight the second liner, which reads, as for the United States, terrorism is defined in the code of the Federal Regulation 28 CFR .85. Sorry, Kevin? Kevin? And we want to highlight. Yeah, no problem, no problem. We were just digressing and talking about the ISPS code. So I was leading towards you to give a contribution. All right, so we want to highlight the 3 lines underneath. As for the United States, we want to highlight that definition there. And now we want to talk about definitions for domestic terrorism and international terrorism. It's critical, guys, that you'll highlight that, study it, learn it, reread it. Again, you will hear the determined definition that, I stand to protect my country from anything foreign or domestic. And it is just along that line where you can have domestic terror. So, for example, on January 6th of 2021, January 6th, 2021, those guys who stormed the Capitol, the federal building in the US, some of them are actually charged for domestic terrorism, guys. You all aware of that? Because it was attack. I mean, yes, it was an attack on a sovereign state, but it was an attack on not on foreign soil, it was an attack on local soil. So some of the charges, one of the guys actually have links to Trinidad and Tobago. One of the charges is actually along the line of domestic terrorism. So something for you all to follow. Sure, Kenneth. And international terrorism. Now, one of the things that we identify is that if it is someone commits an act of terrorism on to a country and you retaliate, is that another form of terrorism or is that an act of self-defense? I'm not sure if I'm coming across clear. I'm seeing that my connection is unstable. Are you all hearing me loud and clear, guys?
Most of the time.
Yeah, you froze up for a little bit, but you're okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, guys. So, you know what? Let's not digress a bit. And again, I want to stick to the time. I know, so Neptune give me an hour. I think 20 minutes into it. So we want to underline, domestic terrorism and international terrorism. Also, for the purpose of CPP, we need to also understand the Canadian aspect of it. Although, again, I stand to be corrected by the chair, we may not be faced with any legal type questions. However, out of the 25 questions that may come in the exam, one of which could be a legal-based question. So in Canada, the 2001 Anti-Terrorism Act defines terrorist activities as an action that takes place either within or outside Canada. That, I want you to highlight that entire. All right, guys, and we're quickly moving on to page 42. And this is a really nice piece of literature that on your free time, guys, I want you.
Keron, can you just repeat the last point you made?
Sure. So please, on the last, in the page 41, I was alluding to one of the module that you'll be tested on CPP is that of legal. However, I stand to be corrected by the chair. However, out of the 200 plus questions that will come, 25 will be non-marked questions. Out of those 25 questions, one of it could be a legal-based question. And it reads, the last liner reads, in Canada, the 2001 Anti-Terrorism Act defines terrorist activities as an action that takes place either within or outside Canada. That entire paragraph is to the bottom there. Okay, guys? So whilst you're doing that, I'll just give our context to the next reading here, guys. On page 42 and 43, if you all could get to read this on your free time, you can record yourself reading the entire 2.2 and memorize it, read it, understand it, and you form your interpretation of each paragraph. It will be so critical to you being a security professional and being able to talk about terrorism briefly. I mean, you are not an expert. I never, you know, as one of the things as CPP, we never taught ourselves to be any expert, but we just have general knowledge of the various elements. So there are 4 classifications for the approaches of terrorism from an analysis standpoint. We have the multi-casual approach, we have the political approach, we have the organizational approach, and we have the psychological approach, all of which I want you to highlight. But for the last one, and I'll speak slowly because I know you all are highlighting right now. For the last one, the psychological approach, it is critical that we dive deep into the second paragraph. So you all could just indicate and tell me if I'm moving too quickly. Carlos, you'll just let me know if I'm moving too fast. Because I know you have something you want to discuss with the team as well thereafter. So we want to move to the second paragraph, and this is our actual question here, guys, that you will see from Carlos, myself, or otherwise. And the second paragraph reads, the most dangerous threat today comes from the global jihadist movement. Again, I want you all to underscore this. I want to underscore the point, sorry, that you all should underline this. The most dangerous threat today comes from the global jihadist movement. The Keeper book, The War for Muslim Minds, Islam and the West 2004, states that the battle for Muslim minds during the next decade will be fought in the communities of the believers on the outskirts of London, Paris, and other European cities where Islam is already a growing part of the West. Now, I don't know if it is you all follow the international news front much, you know, with the insurgents and the evacuation there, or the migration from persons from Syria into the various European countries.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see some. I mean, I'm not taking a side, so I know that I'm being recorded, but it's unfortunate to see some killings that you know, our Muslim brothers and sisters would, some who vehemently object to. And then you see some folks siding with those type of killings. And if you were to look at those type of killings, it is not an active shooter. And again, we are digressing, but it's critical you understand this. It is termed as an active assailant because the majority of these killings are not done by a gun because it's difficult. Everything, again, a gun and trying to do is difficult. Well, a legal gun, sorry. Getting a gun in the European, excuse me, in the European part is extremely difficult, legal or otherwise. So the majority of these killings are actually done with a knife. And if you're going to look at the psychological, again, 2.2.4 talks about the psychological approach, the fact that you could commit a heinous act with a knife, or you know what we saw today with a husband with his wife with a cutlass, it means that you have harbored so much emotions, so much acrimony, so much, you despise, hate, and all these negative emotions pent up that you could actually carry out an unfortunate act with a knife, sword, etc. So there's something to note, and this was written before we start seeing what we're seeing right now. So again, guys, I mean, I don't mean to make a mockery of anything, but this is some real gospel here, guys. You know, it speaks to it of what we are seeing right now. So we want to the page, and we're moving on to page 44. Now there are some within the war on terrorism, again, as we identified before in the video, and we'll have one more video to watch again, that nobody guys, no authority or anybody along that line have a real clear-cut understanding on what is terrorism, how to deal with terrorism. But for the purpose of CPP, we just want to highlight a couple of line items. So on the last paragraph of winning the war on terrorism, we have, although many people focus on Al-Qaeda as the primary terrorist threat, the global jihadist movement comprises many groups of individuals apart from Al-Qaeda. Now, one of the things that I did not see captured in the book, and I mean, I want to be fair, but when we look at 21st century imagery of terrorism, we always tend to think of you know the poverty-stricken Islamic soldier, you know, committing this act. But we have to identify in most recent history that the IRF or we had some Irish persons who were some staunch terrorists, classed as terrorists by the UK government. So, you know, we must not lose sight of that or you know, be blindsided by the imagery that, you know, one side will want to pick. But again, as Carlos will always correct me, for the purpose of CPP, we'll just do what in the people book here, right, guys? So again, I just want you to pay close attention to the fourth paragraph, and we highlight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we end on increase. So I'll just read it out here as you guys are underlining and highlighting. Although many people focus on Al-Qaeda as the primary terrorist threat, the global jihadist movement comprises many groups of individuals apart from Al-Qaeda. Rashid focused on Kazakhstan, Pakistan, etc. And we end on have an increase. But there's nothing here that speaks of the Irish front. Very unfortunate. IRA. Yeah. No, very unfortunate that nobody that it is not identified here, and that is recent. I mean, I was this is about 10 years ago, Carlos, 10, 15 years ago. AXIS was committed on UK soil, and we want to move across again.
I think probably why is that is because it was more specific to just the IRA was more specific to the UK compared to these other groups was kind of more worldwide per se.
Okay, fair enough. I hear your defense to Uncle Sam. I hear you, somebody.
No, I'm not defending. I'm not defending Uncle Sam because I am a British lad, so that's why I can say that. I lived there for 10 years, so.
Right. But I hear you. I just spoke.
It was very specific to their fight for their independence more than anything else. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. So we want to go across to page 45, and the first two line items here, which speaks about Sharia law. And I think that is one of the concept of the fight with our Islamic brothers and sisters. You know, they come into the Western world and they want to introduce their version of their doctrine. So Rashid describes Muhammad teachings about jihad and discusses jihad groups' obsession with implementing Sharia Islamic law. Now, when you dive into the book itself here, you will look at, I mean, if you all had a chance to review the Bay of Pigs, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis, you could understand now the history in terms of how the embargo was set on countries, not only like Cuba, but also all their neighboring allies, like the Venezuela, the other countries that forms was classed as difficult to do business with. So again, ASIS opinion of terrorism would have linked Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria to maintain ties to terrorism or their form of state sponsoring terrorism. Essentially, the definition of the term state sponsored terrorism. Anybody can allude to it? Anybody ever heard that term before? Kevin, except you. State sponsored terrorism. Anybody else could answer except Kevin Rollins?
Yes.
Kenneth, could you please?
Yeah, that's a term that's often been used to describe Iran.
And
as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Right.
And recently Syria as well, as a state sponsor of terrorism. And I think Doha was also listed as one for some time. And Doha, Bahrain.
Thanks, Kenneth. But you know, when you hear state-sponsored terrorism, you know what give me you tell me now, guys. We're just having a conversation here, right? State-sponsored terrorism. What you got from? So other than the countries that we identify, you know, what comes to mind? What and again, it's the term is self-explanatory. So you know, I just want to elaborate and get the point across. Again, anybody could feel free to contribute. Kevin, am I calling you?
In essence, they provide state funding or facilitate through their own security apparatus terrorist activities, or what might be deemed terrorist activities.
Yep. So the critical term here, or the operative word, is funding. You know, I mean, so when we look at, and Kevin, you can feel free to unmute your mic here now, from a maritime setting. When we look at vessels that will pass through our 12-kilometer mile waters, and here it's an Iranian vessel that is going to, I'm just saying, fuel at a neighboring country, anything along that line. Certain red flags will pick up. Certain red flags will say, hey, here what now? Is this activity linked to our sovereign state of Republic of Trinidad and Tobago? Because what you don't want is to find out that us and even you, Mr. Skeet, your country, would have funded some operation that contributes to developing of a cell, to developing of a IED, or any along that line that could have implications to the wider geosphere of peace, of what we term peace to be. So the operative word here, guys, is funding of anything that is related to that of terrorism. Kevin, you have anything to add here by chance? I try to be very cautious with my words, right?
Yes, I remember even when I was at the previous organization there, we had a vessel from one of those high-risk flag vessels was passing through the waters, and it came for bunkers. And before we could even go and give them that bunkers thing, we had to really touch base with the DA, touch base with them and ask if it was safe or if we should. And they in turn said no, because they were on the way going to Brazil or whatever. And they said no, don't give them no bunkers because they were one of the flag vessels. So yeah, in the maritime sphere, that is very prevalent here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Kevin. And guys, I mean, we have a maritime authority here, and I mean, he speaks exactly to it, what we will face with to ensure that we, as a sovereign state, do contribute to the fund. And again, I want to highlight the operative word, the funding for what is termed state-sponsored terrorism. And trust me, guys, we don't want to be a part of that at all. That is for the big wigs. And then, you know, we call ourselves a country, but it's something I like to say we are island. And it, you know, it's nice to play down the size of our country. Yeah, we don't want to get into that. So we want to highlight, and again, just for general knowledge, I can't remember seeing it, but again, it's highlighted here, so I urge you to highlight it nonetheless. Under state-sponsored terrorism, and I think with the contribution from Kenneth and Kevin, we get a nice understanding of what it is. Anybody else who have anything to add, feel free to interject. But we want to look at, in the second paragraph, we want to highlight those countries that are listed as state-sponsored terrorism, or countries who contribute to the funding of activities related to terrorism. And we have Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria. So you can just take a highlight of that, just something to take to be cognizant of. If it is, you know, in your own way of doing business, and you know you come across any activities that is linked to that, that should be a red flag. And remember, guys, you know, in my first class we dealt with what is red flag. So those countries, anything you're dealing with them, need to be highlighted as a red flag. So, for example, for when Caribbean Airlines open up ties with flying to Cuba, there was a lot of work behind the scenes between the Barack Obama government and Trinidad and Tobago to be able to get that in place. And if you get a chance, guys, Cuba is a wonderful country. My wife and I spent 14 years here. It's an amazing country to visit. Yeah, that's what I just plug that in there, guys. So we want to talk about counter-terrorism efforts. And 2.2.5, that titles counter-terrorism efforts. Of course, we all familiar with the term counter-intelligence. So we know what intelligence are, and we know the different counter-intelligence, right? So the main part that we wanted to drive here is the countries that would have started the effort in dealing or addressing terrorism before, as we identified earlier on, before 9/11. This, guys, is critical for you all to take note of. And it starts on the second line from intensify the, and go into the third and fourth line. The original 8 countries that formed the main cooperative effort included United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, and United Kingdom. I don't know if you had if you can recall this. So it essentially talks, this paragraph here talks about these countries were involved in addressing terrorism, as I mentioned, before it became on the radar for the for the creation and the formation of the ISPS code, etc. Carlos, how am I doing the time? Great.
Yes, Keron, you are doing well with time. We started a little late, so yeah.
So I'm just gonna share one video now. It might be a bit heavy. So you all could just take, pull out a nice piece of paper, take a couple of notes. Of course, I give you my word. If you need video, I will share the credit of the video and where I get the video from. But it's some real good info to take note of. Sorry. No, this is a bit too long. If anybody could just confirm that you'll be seeing and hearing, that would be awesome.
Yeah, you're on.
Terrorism does not respect national borders. It affects all nations and can only be defeated collectively. So we must harness the power of multilateralism to find practical solutions.
Across the globe, the United Nations Office of Counter-Terrorism, UNOCT, leads and coordinates an all-of-UN approach to prevent and counter terrorism and violent extremism. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world, UNOCT scaled up its efforts to help member states achieve a world free from terrorism by adapting and innovating to meet this challenging moment. In the unprecedented 2020 environment, promoting multilateral cooperation remained at the center of UNOCT's work. As early as March 2020, UNOCT adopted a strategy to enhance business continuity while also prioritizing the well-being of all staff and leveraging technology to honor its commitments with member states. As a result, UNOCT brought together over 1,000 participants in its first virtual counter-terrorism week from 134 member states, as well as civil society organizations, UN entities, and the private sector, who agreed on the need to strengthen international cooperation to prevent terrorists exploiting the social and economic impacts of COVID-19. Virtual diplomacy has matured rapidly as a new way of conducting international affairs. For example, over the course of the year, Under Secretary General Vladimir Voronkov held over 100 high-level bilateral meetings with member states and international and regional organizations' representatives, promoting international cooperation to counter terrorism. And over 170 member states benefited from the capacity development work of UNOCT across the 4 pillars of the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, with more than 3,200 individuals trained through 167 capacity-building activities. UNOCT experts also participated in 86 outreach events, building partnerships and multiplying impact. In February 2020, UNOCT held, together with the OSCE and Switzerland, a high-level regional conference in Vienna on addressing challenges posed by foreign terrorist fighters. In March 2020, just days after the outbreak of the pandemic in New York, the Global Counter-Terrorism Compact platform was set in motion, becoming the main digital gateway to the counter-terrorism efforts of the United Nations, connecting over 800 focal points from 126 member states and the European Union, and all 43 Global Compact entities. In July, the UNCCT Expo was launched on the occasion of the virtual Counter-Terrorism Week, showcasing through more than 20 videos, interactive maps, and other innovative digital content how UNCCT has developed over the years into a global center of excellence. In August, UNOCT led the virtual commemoration of the 3rd International Day of Remembrance of and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism, including through an audiovisual campaign entitled Not Forgotten: Stories of Remembrance of Victims of Terrorism. The United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center now implements 47 programs and projects engaging 175 countries in areas such as border security, youth engagement, de-radicalization in prisons, countering terrorist financing, launched as a global program in 2020. Preventing and responding to weapons of mass destruction and chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear terrorism and cybersecurity. UNOCT is also working with other UN entities on a global framework to provide support to member states for individuals returned from Iraq and Syria. The office also continued to mainstream gender and human rights considerations into all of its work and to actively engage with civil society organizations. In 2020, UNOCT launched or expanded new and innovative programs to address member states' priorities. They include the Countering Terrorist Travel Program, which now supports 38 beneficiary countries to enhance terrorist detection capabilities using travel information in compliance with human rights. The Fusion Cells Program, which helps member states improve their decision-making, planning and operational capabilities to counter terrorism. The Sports and Security Program, which focuses on the protection of major sporting events and the use of sport and its values as a tool to prevent violent extremism. The project on addressing the terrorist arms crime nexus by preventing and combating the illicit trafficking of small arms and light weapons and their illicit supply to terrorists. In the last quarter of 2020, the office established new program offices in the field: the International Hub on Behavioral Insights to Counter-Terrorism and the Parliamentary Engagement Office in Doha, as well as the UNOCT Program Office in Rabat as a training hub to build counter-terrorism capacities and cooperation in Africa. This significant development, in addition to the existing presences of UNOCT in Ashgabat, Baghdad, Bangkok, Bishkek, Brussels, Budapest, Dhaka, and Khartoum, will help bring UNOCT closer to the beneficiaries of its assistance, increase collaboration with resident coordinators and the UN entities operating in the field, better understand member state priorities, enhance the impact of its assistance, and lead to cost savings that will help to extend funding for programs. In 2020, UNOCT also increased its engagement with key UN bodies and entities, including by briefing 4 times all member states and 9 times the Security Council, actively participating in the Secretary General's Executive Committee and other UN leadership fora, and leading the drafting of 5 reports of the Secretary General to the General Assembly and the Security Council. To further enhance assistance to member states, UNOCT has strengthened existing partnerships and forged new ones. UNOCT signed 6 memoranda of understanding with international and regional organizations, and for the first time, 1 with the private sector under the Countering Terrorist Travel Program. Communicating the results of UNOCT's work in 2020 and raising the visibility of UN counter-terrorism efforts has also been a priority. From active social media engagement to launching a new UNOCT website in all 6 UN official languages to tailored communication strategies and audiovisual products, UNOCT spared no effort to raise public awareness on the importance of tackling terrorism through multilateral cooperation. As UNOCT continues to rely heavily on voluntary contributions to fund its activities, we would like to thank our 34 donors for their support. UNOCT thanks member states and other partners for their continued support and is committed to keep working together for a future without terrorism.
Unmute your mic, Keron.
Guys, you have to forgive me. I'm having some senior moments these days, right, guys? So that video was titled UN Office of Counter-Terrorism 2020 Year in Review. It was published in first quarter 2021 and was published by the United Nations. Now, critical takeaway from that video. I don't know if it is you'll notice something and you could agree, disagree, and we could just talk about it. They identify many approaches that they have in dealing with addressing terrorism, and it highlighted the cooperation from several countries, as opposed to the initial 8 countries that would have mentioned that would have started off before 9/11. Now we have an uptick in 34 countries now that has contributed significantly to the reduction in terrorism. And 2 things that was mentioned would have been the CBRN and cybersecurity. Did you all observe? They spoke about that
Yes.
right after each other? They talk about how they're going to tackle it. They talk about addressing CBRN and cybersecurity. And if you're going to look at your books, guys, on page 46, we have CBRN, and then we go into page 48 that deals with cyber weaponry. Now, what makes ASIS POA book so perfect is that for a security practitioner like all of us here, we get to see the manual, the operating manual, the SOPs that these multi-sector state nations, the United Nations, use to counteract terrorism. We get to be a part of something that is bigger than all of us here. And you all saw it for yourself in looking at this video here. In succession was CBRN, and right after was cybersecurity. Just like we see here, they spoke of everything that we would have spoken about thus far. And we're now going to dive into CBRN now. So what is CBRN? Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorism. It's unfortunate, but these are the acts, these are the tools, these are the weaponries that those folks out there who wish to commit harm to many innocent folks. This is the technology, this is the method, this is the transmission that they use to carry out and execute that. So the classification of those weapons fall within this here. I want you all to highlight CBRN because a question could be asked, what is the definition for CBRN? Again, guys, we are not mortar technicians. Those of you who in the Army will know what that term meant, mortar. We are not chemical engineer specialists. We are security practitioners, and we expected to know a brief understanding or have brief knowledge of what we will expose to in terms of threat and risk outside in the state sector, or the private sector, sorry. For example, I'd like to give the understanding and the explanation at here. It is not our knowledge to know the soil integrity of water and soil fence, but it is our knowledge to know the height that we want defense and the top barrier that we want defense, that we want on top of the fence. You know, for example, you, Kevin, you have an asset in deep southwest, and you have several geological formations that you might put on a fence today and come back and see the earth move. That's not your job. Your job is to tell the engineers to them what size of fence that you want, the type of fence that you want, and the climb, chain link, top barrier, etc. So I say all of that to tell you that it is critical that you know the definition. So a question might come and say, what is CBRN? Or a question might come on, this is an unrelated question, what is EMT? Now you might say, you know EMT to be emergency medical technician. Or next man might say EMT means electrical metal tubing. And next man might say EMT means emergency, I don't know. But it's critical, guys, that you know the definition of what it speaks to from the point of view of ASIS POA. So after you highlight 2.6 CBRN, please highlight the paragraph thereafter, which speaks about the production of weapons of mass destruction, WMD, and the delivery of systems, etc. Just highlight that entire paragraph there. It will help you understand the WMD. When you hear about weapons of mass destruction, you know, you just want to just get you want to be succinct. There's something called PSI, and not PCI, PSI, and it stands for Proliferation of the Security Initiative. It was, watch this video there, they spoke of the initiative, and again, in the text right here in front of us. In the second paragraph of page 47, they spoke of an initiative that was created by the US, of course, that speaks to addressing weapons of mass destruction, and it is called the PSI, which is the Proliferation of the Security Initiative. In May 2003, President Bush announced the Proliferation of Security Initiative, a global multilateral arrangement to seize sensitive cargo. Now, if you work in the port sector, be it air or seaport, you will be familiar with this term. You will be familiar with what is known as ship stores, and you know, to make sure this is not part and parcel of one of those things that might be identified in EPAs. So just again, just some sideline information in passing, but again, guys, it is critical that you have just a base idea on what is outside there in the security sector. Again, we look at the entire POA book, and terrorism is about 10 pages compared to what someone who might specialize in terrorism might be a voluminous text of all of this. So ASIS wants you to get an idea. ASIS wants you to get I don't want to say a conversation starter, but ASIS wants you to understand the basis of what you are working with in the state sector, private sector. We moved on, guys, to 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth paragraph, and it talks about something called super terrorism. And super terrorism, which the author defines as committing of violent acts using advanced technology tools to cause massive damage to the population and or to the public or private support network. Again, guys, when I use the term state sector, private sector, this is essentially, again, you go through the book, and this is how it is classed. We move to the last paragraph, which, as we close off this page here with CBRN. Chemical and biological weapons has been referred to as the poor man's nuclear weapon. Basically, what that means is that those are the type of weapons that the average terrorist will utilize, as opposed to something else that a first world country might have at their disposal. You will tend to get that when you look at the IED type of weaponries or the VID type of weaponries, etc. You will tend to be exposed to these type chemical or biological weapons, referred to as the poor man's nuclear weapon, because those who can't obtain nuclear weapons has pursued chemical or biological agents as the second best option. When Carlos and I, we again, I like to mention, I like to give the genesis. When it was a 6-man team, and when the 6 of us came across this and we researched this extensively, and we were shocked because, again, you hear about the arsenal of weaponry that these first world nations have in terms of nuclear power, and you think that is something that is easy to access. And we did our own research to confirm some of these statements put out here, and you guys here have the benefit of that research that was done. There's a point to share with you. So as we wrap up here now, we move to page 48, 2.7, cyber weaponry. Those of you all who are in the chat group, you all would have seen what I posted today, actually. And the headline reads, increasingly sophisticated ransomware attacks prompted joint alert from the UK, US, and Australia. 2021 trends show increasing global threats of ransomware. Now, this deals really and specifically to cyber weaponry, but we cannot talk about an attack on a physical attack where resulting in loss of life, etc. Because as I was telling you before, terrorism definition could be loss of life. But as we saw in the video from before, nobody really have it locked down. What is the definition of terrorism? If it is, and we saw in the MT Limburg, Kevin, I'll call on you here again. We saw on the MT Limburg, that attack on the MT Limburg was a environmental attack, but yet it almost crippled the economy of Yemen. Now, it wasn't an attack that caused loss of life, but the MT Limburg was an environmental disaster that caused major financial fallout. Just like if you go to trigger your mind back to 2013, when it had a major oil spill in Labre, Point Fortin, and how devastating that was on our economy. Now, if that was, I'm just being ridiculous here. If that was the findings of when last week's unfortunate event of a power outage was more than a tree falling on a line in Gandhi Village. Sorry, in Grand Trace, name something here. Or if it is, we go further back and think that the major oil spill that occurred at the then Petrotrail that they did with in 2013 was the act of a malicious
damage.
Yeah, malicious, malevolent attack, purposefully executed to cause the fallout that it caused. Now again, guys, nobody lost a life. And I'm asking you, everybody here, would you class that as a terrorist act? I hear any crickets?
If the present evidence was not identified, yes, it would have.
Yeah.
Because it's two things you look at: sabotage or terrorist attack.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, thank God the evidence indicate that it wasn't along that line, but we painting the what if scenario. Kevin, you're here with us by chance?
Yes, I'm still here.
Is it the MT Limburg that's the vessel? That's
yeah.
Right?
Correct, yeah.
So when you look at the MT Limburg, guys, the MT Limburg was an attack by some Palestinians. They attacked the vessel. Now, that was classed as a terrorist act. Nobody lost life, but it crippled it almost. It had serious financial devastation to the economy. Now, a cyber attack. If a cyber attack takes place at your organization today, so we moving away from ransomware and along that line, right? A cyber attack, somebody come and just breach your facility through some Cat6 cable. And it is a purposeful, malevolent attack on your asset. I am asking you now, guys, is it a terrorist attack? Anybody?
Repeat the question.
If somebody come and attack your facility through the Cat6 cable and steal everything, would that be a terrorist attack? The obvious answer is no, right? But no. If it is that same person going and attack SORT or NO and not the new entity.
National Operation Task Force or something like that?
I don't know, guys. I'll lean to you all to help me on that.
NOTF.
NOTF, okay. Now, if it is that same operative carry about that malicious attack on the new entity, would that be classed as a terrorist attack?
Yes, because of the nature of the operations of things as towards the country.
Now, right? Now the question is at the playoff now. What if the person was a local person? What would that be?
Domestic.
Now, Dr. Morgan Job would have said in an instance that if you're still alive and sitting inside of me, you'd have said, go to the front of the class. That was actually one of my lecturers with great guy. Yes, guys. So we flow in. And just taking a pause from as we wrapping up here. Just taking a pause just to prompt some questions. And again, just to trigger thought, okay, guys? So cyber attack is critical. I want you all to look at page 49, the third paragraph. And again, look at here again. Look at the right here again. After September 11, the threat of terrorist attack on government and commercial network crystallized dramatically. Again, guys, ASIS points out to us that the upgrade to security came after 9/11. But of course, in this manual, they want to identify that certain countries were working on, and again, tying it back to this chapter. 8 countries were working on counter-terrorism way before. Yeah, Kenneth?
No, I mean, the other significant thing with 9/11 that is important to note is that Al-Qaeda invested very heavily in all the major financial markets, and they liquidated everything the day before. And they were able to finance the operation. That's how they continue to finance the operations. And that is why now you have the whole thing of the requirements in banking now, the new standards in banking. Is how you get to your funding, your anti-money laundering, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because it was determined that a lot of the major transactions that took place the day before 9/11 were linked to Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network.
Again, Kenneth, I hear you not. I hear you.
Somewhat unknowingly to a lot of people who made investments.
And then the other thing as well is, if you look at the impact as well at 9/11 on the worldwide financial market, all stock markets were closed for the better part of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I am not saying that the jury is still out. I am just saying that, for someone who loves to research, and as me, I love to research. I am yet to be satisfied with my research to see that it was indeed externally there was no influence from domestic support. That's just my opinion.
Yes, I have my class going on.
That's just my opinion. I hear you not, and I
This is on what, 9/11?
Yes.
No, that was all external, but I'm saying that what Al-Qaeda did, and this is to tie into what you were saying about funding and that sort of stuff, the financial impact of a terrorist act, is that they had invested very heavily in stock markets around the world and liquidated all their investments the day before 9/11.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting it was domestic.
Right.
But I'm just saying this is how they finance the operations post 9/11.
Yep.
And of course, the shutting down of the economies or the stock markets, the major hubs for financial activities for a period of 2 weeks, also had its financial impact, not just on the US, but on the global economy as well.
Yeah. So as we transition to the final page, and we want to talk about manpads, and I don't know if anybody have the updated POA. Anybody have the updated POA by chance? Kevin, you have it, by chance?
The one that I have is the one that I got from Carlos.
Okay, the official book that you bought. Okay, gotcha. All right, so the only changes that I would have observed, I stand to be corrected. The only changes that I would observe in terms of crisis management would have been they went a bit at lengths to discuss manpads, drone technology, and probably I mean I didn't see any along that line, but probably anything wasn't published as yet. Was that of bioterrorism, and possibly linking to what we currently in, which is a pandemic, and if it probably could be linked to bioterrorism in along that line. But I just wanted to add that in before I ask you to highlight one last line. And again, this is critical for you to highlight. As we turn to page 50, the second paragraph, the most dramatic development in individual weaponry is that of precision guided munition, PGM, or manpads, man-portable air defense systems. And it went into to tell you what the PGMs are, but again, a question may come, what is a manpad? And if you never heard it before, your mind will wonder and say, what am I reading here? What exam am I doing? So again, critical is to get the definitions down, to get the abbreviations down, etc. To again, ASIS International don't want to make you an expert, the go-to expert in counter-terrorism, sorry. But it wants to give you an idea of what you are facing with in the private sector, a private space, or the public space. So guys, that sums it up for what we have covered here and what is critical to know. Of course, I stand to be corrected, it is critical that you know from the entire book, but just some salient points we have identified in today's session. I want to thank you all for the hour that I spent with you all. And I will open up the floor for any contributions, any questions, comments that I could answer. If I don't have the answer for it, I'll hand the floor over to Carlos or Kevin. So guys, thank you all so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Keron.
My pleasure, guys.
Yeah, just back to the question that I raised earlier. Regards to the review of the we put the link email first so we can have a look at it, because as you know, I wasn't here for the whole session.
No, that is no problem at all. I give you my commitment. I'll put that out first thing tomorrow. I really want to wrap up here, guys. I had a long one. Right now, at nauseam we discussing last week's event. But I will make sure and put it up online. Definitely this weekend.
And if possible, the previous session that we did too, where we highlighted capabilities. Early in the game when we did the session with you as well. If you have the link
okay,
for
sure,
that.
No problem. I'll send you back the links again for that. Okay, okay, no problem.
Keron, is the videos easily obtainable?
I will put those videos in a link as well and send that to you all on the weekend. Especially that last video, guys. That last video, I don't know if anybody picked up on it, but that last video is a condense of what we went through for the past hour. 7 minutes of the last hour we went through. Anybody picked up on that by chance?
Yeah. It moved a little fast, but I recognize there was something that I need to go back to ensure that I grasp what I want to grasp. So
yes.
That's why I asked the question.
Right. Okay. All right. Great. I'll make sure and put that link. All right, guys. So me, I like to bring the aspect of harmony. So now I invite you all to turn on your cameras. You just get a snapshot, and again, this is the time now. When I turn off the recording thereafter, we could just trash out, and before I hand you back over to the chair. Mr. Skeeter and Senior. Right.
I'm here.
So Mr. Batiste, Mr. Mohammed.
Momento.
Right. So have you all had a chance to in fact, I'll just let me take the shot there. Riyadh, not seen it. Okay, nice. Chair or Mike? All right. Gonna stop the recording in a few. Mike, you there with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, and we're not seeing you.
Just now.
Alrighty, well, no problem. Let me not keep everybody back, so I'll just stop the recording there now, guys. Let me save it here.